Ecuador's constitutional court on Wednesday admitted the impeachment proceedings against the president, Guillermo Lasso. In the United States, a train carrying ethanol derailed in southwest Minnesota, causing a number of cars to burst into flames. And Palestinians all over the world commemorate Palestinian Land Day to reject Israel's colonialist policies and defend their culture, identity, and nationhood. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada, and these are the news. Ecuador's constitutional court on Wednesday admitted the impeachment proceedings against the president, Guillermo Lasso. The request for admissibility of the proceedings against Lasso was approved during a plenary session with 6 votes in favor and 3 abstentions. The resolution is based on the second draft opinion prepared by Judges Ali Lozada and Richard Ortiz. On the other hand, the Legislative Board now has 3 days to study the report and then send it to the Oversight Commission, which has approximately 1 month to gather evidence so that the President can exercise his right to defense. Subsequently, the trial will go to the plenary of the Assembly, and there 92 votes will be needed to censure and remove Lasso from office. The impeachment request against Ecuadorian President Guillermo Lasso is based on the investigation report of the case known as El Gran Padrino, or the Great Godfather, in which he is accused of having responsibility in an alleged corruption scheme in public companies, arguably headed by Danilo Carrera, Lasso's brother-in-law, and Rubén Cherres, a close acquaintance of the Ecuadorian head of state. In this regard, the Constitutional Court has admitted the impeachment accusation for the alleged crime of embezzlement against the president, as it considers it falls within the admissibility requirements established by the law. However, it dismissed 2 other charges related to the crime of extortion because, according to the court, they do not meet the requirements. Through a statement issued, the tribunal stated that it was necessary to conduct an analysis of the procedure and content of the request. On Wednesday, Brazil's federal police called ex-president Jair Bolsonaro and his former Lieutenant Colonel Mauro Cid to testify in the case of undeclared jewels that Saudi Arabia delivered to the former president in 2019. The preliminary inform told us that some of the gifts given by Saudi Arabia will have entered the national territory in an irregular manner. Allegations include a package from the luxury Swiss brand Chopard and a set of the same brand intended for Mauro Cid's wife and the former First Lady Michelle Bolsonaro, valued by the press at more than $3 million. The testimonies have been scheduled for April the 5th. Jair Bolsonaro returned to Brazil on Thursday, 3 months after leaving for the United States in the final hours of his term, ahead of President Lula's inauguration. On Wednesday in Uruguay, the ruling party political leader and senator Gustavo Penades was accused of sexual abuse against minors. The accusations against the lawmaker were issued on social networks. The complaint, Romina Celeste, said that when she was 13 years old, she was abused by these men in 2 occasions. In this way, the senator called a press conference in which he did not accept questions and described the case as a slander. Meanwhile, testimonies of other people that ratified that Penades had and maintains sexual relations with minors have been recorded. Finally, the congressperson announced that he will file a lawsuit for defamation and slander against his accuser and promised to submit himself to justice, although he stressed that he will continue in his post. During a meeting of the Council of Ministers of Cuba held on Wednesday, President Miguel Díaz-Canel highlighted the results of the recent legislative elections in the midst of the complex context due to the economic asphyxia that the largest of the Antilles is going through.
What is truly significant here is that in the last 6 months in the life of this country, in the mix of this complex situation we are going through, We have held three highly significant elections: family code, municipal elections, and national elections, in 6 months. In the midst of these conditions, an act of courage of the revolution.
On the other hand, the Cuban president celebrated the high turnout in the elections, in which 407 deputies were elected to the National Assembly, which represents a sign of support for the revolutionary process.
Almost 76% participation that would not have been possible if the people didn't continue trusting revolution. These percentages are one of the best in any electoral process in any part of the world. In terms of participation, therefore, I believe that the people gave example of civicness, but also of patriotism, of loyalty to the revolution, of fidelity, of political awareness, showing that if you know and if you feel who is the real cause of the situation we are facing.
Finally, President Diaz-Canel rejected the discreditation campaign or the slander campaign carried out by the hegemonic press against the Cuban electoral process.
A certain counter-revolutionary press wants to make a party with the election results in Cuba and presents them as the great abstentions. But this is the same press that makes up the election result of the first world nations, when the participation in these processes does not reach 60%, and they are nations that are neither blockaded nor attacked nor are subjected to the huge discreditation campaign. Then one should ask why this bias and tendentious look against Cuba. Simple, because sometimes we do not believe it. We are an example to the world.
Let's take a short break. But first, remember you can follow us on our TikTok account at TeleSUR English, in which you will be able to see news in different formats, news updates, and more. Other stories coming up. Stay with us. Welcome back. In the United States, a train carrying ethanol derailed in southwest Minnesota on Thursday, causing a number of cars to burst into flames. The derailment occurred just inside the city of Raymond, with authorities confirming that some of the cars were carrying ethanol and corn syrup. Meanwhile, police established an evacuation zone of a half-mile, asking people to leave their homes and providing shelter in a nearby town. They also said there were no injuries as a result of the crash or the emergency response, and that BNSF railway personnel were on the ground to help at the scene. The latest derailment in Minnesota followed a number of high-profile train mishaps in the U.S., highlighted by the ones in the East Palestine, Ohio, earlier this year that sparked a public health and environmental emergency. In Japan, the inaugural Pride 7 summit was held in Tokyo with the aim of getting the Japanese government to acknowledge rights for the LGBTQI+ community. Japanese activists launched a civil engagement group to make policy proposals ahead of the G7 summit to be held in Japan. Japan is the only member of the bloc that lacks a law to protect the rights of sexual diversity. The Pride 7 project plans to make proposals to advance same-sex marriage, rights promotion, and a law against LGBTQI+ discrimination in Japan, while addressing the problem in other Asian countries. In the Philippines, a ferry carrying 205 passengers and crew caught fire and at least 12 people were killed. 7 are reported missing. Many of those rescued had jumped from the ferry at the height of the fire and were helped from the sea by the Coast Guard, the Navy, another ferry, and by local fishermen. Among the dead were at least 3 children who were apparently separated from their parents. 23 passengers were injured and taken to hospitals. The governor said that most of the people aboard the MV Lady Mary Joy 3 were rescued overnight, but authorities were double-checking from different rescue teams, so the numbers could change. The ferry was headed for the town of Jolo in Sulu province. China's Premier Li Qiang on Thursday called on Asian nations to stand united and strengthen cooperation for lasting peace during the Boao Economic Forum. The Premier participates in the Boao Forum for Asia, a government-organized event on discussions of economic and development issues. During his speech, Li Qiang called on Asian countries to work together for an enduring, peaceful and stable perspective. The Boao Economic Forum, organized by China and considered the Asian alternative to Davos World Economic Forum, kicked off in person after 3 years of pandemic amidst a new world economic order in which Asia is expected to lead world growth in 2023 in the face of the global slowdown. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will visit Turkey on April 6 to 7 to hold talks with his Turkish counterpart, Mevlut Cavusoglu, the Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zaharova announced on Thursday. The information stated that the contacts will first of all discuss the state and prospects of bilateral cooperation in areas of mutual interests, including trade, energy and tourism. She said that the exchange of views on relevant issues on the regional and international agenda will continue, including the current situation in Ukraine, issues related to Syria and Nagorno-Karabakh, as well as Central Asia and Afghanistan. Finally, Zaharova stressed that the two foreign ministers will address a schedule of bilateral contacts at various levels during the talks.
Is unblocking Ukrainian grain exports.
In Russia, the Public Relations Center of the Federal Security Service, FSB, reported on Thursday the arrest of the Wall Street Journal correspondent Ivan Gershkovich in Ekaterinburg on suspicion of espionage. The spokesperson of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Maria Zaharova, stated via Telegram that what the employee of the American edition of the Wall Street Journal was doing in Ekaterinburg had nothing to do with journalism. According to the Russian FSB department, Gershkovich collected data on one of the companies of the military-industrial complex as part of the instructions from the U.S. side. For his part, Presidential Press Secretary Dmitry Peskov expressed his hopes that the arrest will not lead to the closure of Russian bureaus in the United States. Meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal newspaper denied the accusations and demanded the immediate release of the journalist.
Russia's FSB security service said 1 year old.
On Wednesday, the United States Vice President Kamala Harris arrived in Tanzania for a 2-day visit as part of a three-nation trip to the African continent. In the framework of the visit, Kamala Harris announced a more than $1 billion initiative to improve women's financial empowerment in Africa and also unveiled a $60 million fund for women in the digital economy and nearly $400 million for the private sector. Prior to the Tanzania stay, Harris already announced $139 million in development and agricultural aid for Ghana and $100 million investment in stability and peace building for West African coastal nations facing the threat of terrorist violence. The tour follows a December summit held by the President Joe Biden in Washington with African leaders as the U.S. tries to balance the growing influence of Chinese and Russia on the continent. TeleSUR English continues to grow. You can now tune in from 33 different African countries through StarSat. Dial 461 and enjoy our Latin American alternative broadcast. One final short break and we'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. On Thursday, Palestinians demonstrate on the Israel-Gaza border to mark Palestinian Land Day. Palestinians gathered near the Israel-Gaza border barrier for a rally to mark the Palestinian Land Day. For the last 47 years, the Palestinian people have commemorated the date by holding rallies in the occupied West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and Arab villages throughout Israel. The Land Day is of special significance to the Palestinians because it was the first time since 1948 that Palestinians in Israel organized a collective response to Israeli policies. On March 30th, 1976, thousands of Palestinians in the northern Galilee region demonstrated against the seizure by Israel of large tracts of Arab land, prompting Israeli troops to use lethal force, killing 6 Palestinians. The demonstrations first kicked off in the town of Deir Hana and was met by the heavy brutality by Israeli police. This was followed by further protests in the town of Arbach in the Galilee region, during which 1 Palestinian was killed and dozens more injured by Israeli forces. The extrajudicial killing triggered widespread demonstrations and violent clashes with Israeli forces in a number of other Arab towns and villages in which the forces shot and killed 6 Palestinians. The Land Day is of special significance to the Palestinians because it was the first time since 1948 that Palestinians in Israel organized a collective response to Israeli policies. Not only by Palestinians or Palestine, but also the diaspora all over the world. And now we move on to other topics. A storm in central Syria collapsed building walls in 2 villages, killing 4 people and injuring several others. According to the country's civil defense, among the fatalities were 2 children who died after heavy winds caused their home walls to collapse. Meanwhile, authorities also reported infrastructure damage as a result of the storm, which struck several high-voltage lines, causing power outages in the provinces of Hama and Sueda. Likewise, the General Directorate of Ports announced the closure of all facilities in 2 coastal cities, while suspending fishing and navigation activities as a precaution. Torrential rains across Yemen and the country's capital of Sana'a have triggered flash floods and collapsed homes throughout the nation. According to the disaster management system, the port of Al-Mukalla and the capital have been badly hit by heavy rainfall over the last 24 hours. Likewise, the agency said that more than 13,000 Yemeni families have been affected by the heavier than usual rains, accompanied by thunderstorms. In this sense, several social organizations urged the international community to send humanitarian aid to the country to help the most affected regions. And Thai authorities used helicopters on Thursday to try to contain a fire that engulfed 2 mountains overnight on largely undeveloped forest land in the province northeast of the capital, Bangkok. The fire broke out on Wednesday in Nakhon Nayok province, over 100 kilometers northeast of Bangkok, but firefighters could not directly tackle it because of the mountains are too steep to safely climb. At least 10 firefighting vehicles were dispatched to battle the blaze, and they were joined by at least 2 helicopters, which surveyed the situation and dumped water. Other forest fires have broken out in recent days in provinces further north as seasonal temperatures rise, a constant problem that contributes to dangerously high levels of pollution.
In addition to the direction of the wind, I must also ensure the life and safety of those carrying out the operation. After reviewing the situation, since it is on the top of the mountain, we had to withdraw and stand by to meet and see what we can do tomorrow.
And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.